Hi, Mark. Welcome to
Hi,
class two.
Carolyn.
And hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. The first thing I want to say about this wonderful class, Adversity and Resilience, is that when I read your description of it, I was reminded of a story that I read that changed my life. It changed my life. And it's exactly this topic. And it was about a captain of a ship who um, had become so skilled that he thought he had earned the right to find a safe harbor and just have gentle waters. So he did, and he thought, well, I'm such a good captain, I can stay here in these calm waters. And as time passed, he lost his skill, which made him such a great captain because he no longer was so
Right.
crafty at being able to navigate the rough waters. He'd lost that. So when he went out the next time, he had become so complacent, he'd become so sloppy, he'd become so weak that he didn't realize that it was because he was always in rough seas that he was so superb at navigation. And I read that story. I think I read it 5 times because I thought that's life. And I'm telling you that from that time on, whatever difficulties, whatever challenges, I see them as being like the sharp skills. I've got to develop this. This is intuitive. I learn nothing if nothing's happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, what wiser lessons could you teach? I do not know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get out of your way. You call me at the end of the class and I'll be here.
Okay. Thank you, Carolyn. That was a perfect introduction to our class this evening on adversity and resilience. I hope that I hope you've gotten some writing done in the last couple of days. I posted 10 deepening prompts for you to use during this course. And I recommend you try to put 15 or 20 minutes a day into exploring these ideas for yourself. Emerson was a great believer in journaling for insight. It really was his primary spiritual practice. You could say that and being in nature were his twin favorite practices for tuning in and tuning up. So I would like to encourage you to take 15 or 20 minutes a day to do some writing to help you deepen into the course and into the themes that we're exploring. So on Tuesday, just to recap, we looked at nonconformity and originality, Emerson's profound teachings on contradiction and originality, and the fact that until we make space for our own inconsistencies, we can't touch into the thing in us that is unique, that's particular. What Jung called the golden shadow, the parts of ourselves that we keep off limits that are actually great gifts, but are somehow awkward for us, uncomfortable, or we don't quite know what to do with them. So by touching into our contradictions and our golden shadow, we embody our own originality. And nonconformity is the ability to trust ourselves. That's Emerson's great theme, trust yourself. Know that that's what's true for you in the depths of your heart is true for all people. And that when you listen to that whisper that only you can hear, it takes you to a much deeper level of awareness. So this evening, we're going to look at adversity and resilience. Emerson was a black belt in adversity. From the time he was very young, he went through terrible, traumatic losses. His dad died when he was 8. His mother raised his brothers and him in poverty. Then he married his young wife, as I told you on Tuesday, at 19, and she died the following year from tuberculosis. Then he lost his firstborn son. And on it went. He grew up in the shadow of death. In fact, his childhood room looked out onto a cemetery. If you can imagine that. So while in this extroverted household full of all of these outgoing, popular brothers, Emerson was the chubby, awkward, antisocial kid in the basement looking out the window at the cemetery and writing in his journal. That's who he was. That was the heart of his personality. But he came to see that as much as we suffer, as much loss as there is in life, the circumstances that we go through, the challenges that we face, belong to what he called the exterior life. We talked a little bit about this in the first class. The exterior life is the world of samsara, as the Buddhists call it, the world of change, the slings and arrows that flesh is heir to. All of the shifting circumstances of our lives belong to the exterior life. And these are real. And the pain that happens there is real. But there's another dimension to our being, which he referred to as the interior life. And that's the self that doesn't change. It's the spirit, it's the soul that's beyond the vicissitudes of the mortal coil, you could say. There's the relative, and then there is the absolute or the transcendental. And he makes very clear that those are different levels. And when you come to understand that, you notice in your own experience that there are ways that adversity doesn't touch you quite the way you might expect it to. For example, for Waldo, for Emerson, Wally's death, the death of his son, was the worst tragedy of his life, even worse than losing his first wife. His dying words, Emerson's dying words, were that beautiful boy. He went through his life holding Wally dear to him. So it wasn't that he was emotionally vacant or dissociated, not at all. But what he came to see is that even though the worst had happened, there was a part of him that had not been destroyed. Vince, could we just pull up that first card, please? Here we go. He said, "So it is with this calamity. It does not touch me. Something which I fancied was a part of me, which could not be torn away without tearing me, nor enlarged without enriching me, falls off from me and leaves no scar." That's such a paradoxical experience. So the worst happens. There's terrible grief. There's terrible heartbreak. And yet there's something in him that isn't touched. It falls away from me and leaves no scar. You can drop the card now. So we ask ourselves, how is that possible? How is it possible that we can go through tragedies, bona fide tragedies, bona fide devastations, and emerge intact? That's really what we're going to be looking at this evening. And it means understanding the difference between Emerson's description of the exterior versus the interior life. So in the relative world of forms and appearances and changing circumstances where things are born and they die and we suffer and we grieve, that is as it should be, right? We are human beings. That's as it should be. But in the world of spirit, nothing dies, nothing is born, and the spirit isn't harmed. So holding those things simultaneously is the path of wisdom, Emerson suggests. And he was vividly aware of that distinction. He had to be, because he had a depressive personality. He was a melancholic kind of guy anyway. So he had to find a way of finding his path through so much darkness and so much loss. He said, "The only thing that grief has taught me is to know how shallow it is." Isn't that amazing? We don't think of grief as shallow. We think of grief as this huge, permanent, immovable thing, this unwieldy thing that goes right to the heart, to the depths of who we are. Emerson is suggesting no, that we are touched on the emotional level. We can have profound feelings and deep sorrow, but that at the end of the day, there's a shallowness to even the worst emotional experiences. Now, the problem is that we sometimes seek out suffering. We seek out drama. We seek out the big highs and the big lows, and then we hold on to them as hard as we can because it makes us feel alive, right? In the day-to-day course of our existence, it can sometimes feel kind of middle of the road. And there's something in the human being that longs for the high peaks and the low valleys. As the great Jewish novelist Saul Bellow said about the Jews, he said, they're afraid that if they stop suffering, they'll have nothing. And there is some truth. There's a connection there to what Emerson is talking about. Could we pull up that next card, please, Vince? Here we go. There are moods in which we court suffering in the hope that here at least we shall find reality, sharp peaks and edges of truth. But it turns out to be scene painting and counterfeit. Isn't that amazing? So we look for suffering in certain kinds of moods. We seek those peaks and valleys because it's vitalizing. It feels vitalizing, even if it's a negative kind of vitality. But then what we come to discover is it's actually counterfeit. It's actually scene painting. It's only happening on the outside. Now, this is a very challenging suggestion for some people because, of course, we attach to our pain. We identify with it. We define ourselves by it. And then we have all kinds of stories about our pain and how it makes us who we are. So there are folks who are very threatened by the idea that belongs to the exterior life and not the interior life, and that there's a shallowness, that there's just a shallowness to suffering. And so it's important to look at that response. If you have that response, ask yourself, why is that? What are you defending? What pain are you defending? What identification are you defending with the challenges and the adversities of your life? And begin to tweak them apart from who you actually are. And this is where writing can help a lot. One of the prompts I use all the time with folks is, what are the payoffs for holding on to whatever it is that's hurting you? What are the payoffs? Because they're real. And there's no criticism or condemnation in that. It's just acknowledging that we can get a kind of perverse satisfaction over poor me and how awful things are. And and why me? That's a question I've never understood. Why me? Well, why not me? But a lot of people it's very common to fall into that clutching onto pain because we think that it's us and then defending it. And then, of course, we are defeating our own purposes. We don't, unless we truly want to live in pain. We're defeating our own purposes when we defend our pain against scrutiny and against understanding that it belongs to a different level of experience than our deepest spiritual life. As Emerson put it, all loss, all pain is particular. The universe remains to the heart unhurt. You see that? So on a personal level, all loss, all pain is particular. It's unique to us. It happens in time and space, but the universe remains to the heart unhurt. So as we begin to shift our perspective, the gestalt of how we look at the world and see the spirit in the foreground and the changing circumstances in the background, it gives space for our pain to rise, to be experienced, and then to pass away. And that is not dissociation. It's very important. We're not talking about denying our feelings. We're not talking about denying hardships. We're understanding the paradox that form and formlessness, that emotion and spirit all coexist in us. And that's both our challenge as hybrid beings, as Homo duplex, the two-sided ape. That's our challenge, but it's also our great, great opportunity. As a Stoic, Emerson believed that we weather hardship by making this distinction between what can be harmed in us and what can't, and how pain happens. He said, nothing external to you has any power over you. Just think about that for a minute. Nothing external to you has any power over you. Have you had that experience? Do you believe that? Does that sound like pie in the sky? Does it sound like dissociation? It's really important to look at this because it's central to Emerson's philosophy as it was to the Stoics. Can we pull up that next card, please? Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor and Stoic, said, or wrote rather in his meditations, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Now, we're not being flip about pain. We're not talking about physical torture. Obviously, we can't just revoke physical torture when it's happening to us. We're talking about emotional pain that we compound through story and through identification. And when you see that it's your response to the pain, or the loss, whatever it is, and not the thing itself that has the power, you take back what psychologists call your internal locus of control. You're no longer at the effect of everything coming at you all the time. You're no longer constantly giving your power away. You're saying, I, as a reasonable, semi-reasonable individual with some mindfulness and some self-awareness, do have a choice in how I respond to what happens to me. And that is the quantum leap in self-realization. And when you understand that you're not simply a cog in this wheel, that you're not simply a victim, you're a co-creator of your own experience. So again, it's not about denying what's coming at us. It's about understanding that how we respond to it is within our control very often. We make these kinds of choices and learn to separate what's going on out there from what's going on in here through the exercise of reason, Emerson said. And reason for Emerson wasn't, and for the Stoics, isn't what we think of it today. We tend to think of reason as analytical thought. But that's only part of the picture. For the ancients and for Emerson, reason was pointed to the processes of nature. He said that the Stoics said that the processes of nature, that there's a universal reason, which they called logos, which is inherent in all things. And when we connect to that reason in ourselves and the world around us, and we learn to exercise that reason in times of adversity, that's what liberates the power of resilience. It's being able to respond reasonably to what's happening to us. And again, that doesn't mean suppressing your feelings. In fact, it could be argued that feelings are a part of reason. I don't know that it's possible to have a higher reason without acknowledging the totality of our experience. But reason is what enables us to make the choice of what we're going to allow to hurt us, what we're going to respond to, and how we're going to respond. And when we abandon our reason, we abandon our greatest tool, our greatest ally. So ask yourself about your own relationship to reason. Do you tend to privilege emotion over reason? Do you think of reason and rationality and analysis as part of the patriarchy? Something that just doesn't belong in the life of a wise person. It's all about intuition. It's all about feeling. Or do you work and practice to balance those two things in your life? Right? That really is the challenge for all of us, is to balance reason and emotion, and to get that there's a higher reason, a logos, an order to the universe that we participate in. And as we tune into our own wisdom, it puts us in alignment with that order, that logos that the Stoics are talking about. When we exercise reason, we choose whether we are going to be enlarged or diminished by our losses and by our human condition. Do we isolate ourselves in self-pity, or do we use our losses and adversities as opportunities to connect with other people in pain? And to, as Carolyn was saying at the beginning, to sharpen our tools, to sharpen the tools of response and resilience. Because we can go to sleep. Something in us can begin to go to sleep, and we'll be talking about that later in the session. In times of comfort and ease, which of course we all enjoy when things are going well, but spiritually speaking, and when it comes to personal growth, it's challenge that enlarges us. It's challenge that deepens us, and challenge that ultimately shatters the ego, which needs to be shattered for us to tap into the thing in us that is wise and deep and bigger than our mere personality.